Good afternoon, my friends. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can be with you forever. I'm going to be leaving my email in the description, so if you want to email me for anything at all, for production lessons, for astrology readings or tarot readings, anything at all, feel free to hit me up, and I'll be putting in my YouTube membership program link in the description as well as my Patreon. So I'm currently working on a new documentary detailing about Dragon Ball and its cultural influences around the world. So it's going to be a pretty big documentary. I just finished the first draft of the script. So, as that's being made, I'm going to be posting, pieces of it through my Patreon and through the YouTube thing. And as well, once I finish the documentary in completion, you're going to be able to have access to that documentary in full and you'll be able to watch it. Otherwise, I'm going to be posting it in episodic segments every week or so. There probably will be about 10 episodes or something like that. I haven't really segmented it out properly fully yet, so we'll see how that turns out. But just so you know, when I do finish the documentary, which I'm going to do in advance before I start releasing it, you will have access to that. So if you want to subscribe to any of those things, Patreon or YouTube, it's the same thing. I just have two different aspects there. You can check it out. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what's relevant today, and that's about it's about Black Lives Matter and the protests and all of that. But I want to focus on something different because I don't want to just talk about what everyone else is already talking about. I think this isn't really a time for me as a white man to discuss these things, although I think that everyone should be discussing in the conversation. I just don't think that people should be talking over other people, especially people who are black and are affected by what's going on very personally. They shouldn't feel silenced in any way, which I think is definitely the aspect that people should look into. And this, has nothing to do with rights or, feeling like your opinion is invalid or anything like that. It's just about manners. It's just about respect. It's about respecting people's beliefs and especially respecting people who are actually affected by these things. I'm seeing a lot of white people specifically, getting overtly angry to the point where it's if you're angry because this is affecting you personally, then that's a different story, right? This is definitely very understandable as a person, who's affected by this personally. But if this is something that has nothing really to do with you and you're evoking so much intense emotions and expressing so much anger and attacking other people for holding views or holding opinions, then it's kind of like, who are you helping exactly? Who are you trying to help? What are you trying to gain with this kind of attitude? Because I notice it a lot and it's kind of confusing to me because I see the situation and I, try to take it seriously and try to educate myself and try to see things from a lot of different points of view, especially amongst black people, because not every black person has the same fucking opinion. That's just stupid. It's stupid to assume that. And people post opinions or they hear things, they get a little modicum of information or education about a certain subject, and they think now they have to enact this, hero mentality that they're going to come in and save the day for the oppressed people, and they're going to rally up all the racists and they're going to attack the racists, and all the people that are on the fence are going to be challenged and all this other stuff. It's like, what's your end goal in all of this? Are you actually trying to help the situation, try to help people understand the situation, try to make people empathize and open up their hearts and open up their minds to learn and understand things? Or are you just trying to prove that you're a morally superior person and you want to express that, and if someone is not on your same level of morality, then that's somehow problematic, they're part of the problem? It's a complicated situation, and I think that needed to be addressed, because it's if your heart's full of hate, there's not going to be much room for love there. And if you really love people, and in this case, Black lives, but this extends to everything in life. If you're constantly consumed by hatred, you're going to have a hard time finding compassion and understanding towards other people because you're just so consumed with this anger and hate. And, you know, I think with the protests and riots, I think it's justifiable. I don't think that riots are necessarily bad. I think in their time and place, they have, you know, an ability to make change and make progress in the world, and they have their place. I mean, this is how things happen. If things are stuck in a system of oppression and you need to break that system, and the only way to do that is through riots and in this way, then go ahead and do that. I'm not going to be the one to tell people what they should or shouldn't do, but I will tell people who are of, you know, my complexion, other white people, to, you know, maybe take a step back from feeling like you need to be the hero and you need to save people, or you need to be the one to justify what you believe to be the right thing. Because I think there's a lot of people who have different views. There's a lot of Black people who think the riots are negative and they shouldn't riot at all, and there's a lot of Black people who think rioting is very important. We need to riot. We need to stand up for ourselves. And this is a time where people need to take their strengths, what they're good at, what they're most representative of. And this doesn't have to be sharing posts on Facebook or even going to the protests or even doing anything at all. Maybe this is just, you know, if you're in your day-to-day work environment, is being more respectful. Maybe this just has to do with you talking less even. Maybe all the stuff where people like, we need to do something, you need to do something. If you're not doing anything, you're part of the problem. Maybe a lot of what the problem is people actually doing too much, you know, forcing their opinions too much down other people's throats. I know I kind of do that, especially online. In real life, if you actually know who I am, I'm a pretty quiet person. I don't really interact a lot with people in group settings. I don't like to talk over people especially, and I find that very disrespectful. So if you're an extroverted person, you know, maybe instead of being the one who's always talking and utilizing that strength to, you know, be the center of attention, maybe this time just don't do that. Just don't talk. Instead, listen a little bit. Or maybe if you're the kind of person who doesn't engage in a lot of discussions pertaining to these issues, maybe you should be the one to start discussing and bringing your insights into discussion, basically. And, you know, I'm going to like change subjects a little bit here because, you know, I don't want to get too much in depth in terms of what people should or shouldn't do, because it really comes down to the individual and what the individual believes is the right thing to do at the right given time. And that's going to be different every time. But I'm going to be talking about other aspects related to, you know, racism or just racial representation that happens in the world that I want to address because I think it's problematic in a different context that isn't talked about. And this is the aspect of diversity in film and TV shows specifically. And I'm definitely pro diversity in the aspect of, you know, we shouldn't whitewash narratives and only cast a certain group of people because that's the most marketable way to do something. I think there definitely needs to be a place in narrative building that encompasses, you know, different perspectives, different backgrounds. I think that's an exercise, especially as a writer, that expands your ability to connect with people and to build characters. And it also builds aspects of empathy and connection to other people that you might not have felt like you connected with on that level. And I'm going to start talking about diversity because I see a lot of diversity in films and TV shows, and there's no point to it, right? And this is the aspect of diversity that I really dislike, is seeing diversity that's used just for the sake of diversity. And I'll give you an example. This new show, The Witcher, which I didn't watch a lot of episodes. I watched like maybe 1 or 2 episodes. And it's okay. I can't complain about the actual plot and structure of the show itself. I think it's fine. I'm not offended by it, really. What I did find offensive was the forced diversity in the show. And the reason why I think that's a problem is because, you have this medieval background, or this backdrop, this environment, which is Nordic primarily. It's based off of Polish folk tales. So this is a white place in history. This is a white area in time in history where if you were to go to those same locations and places, it would just be a bunch of white people hanging out in a village. That's just the demographics of that time. We didn't have diversity back then. And the show has like a ridiculous amount of diversity to the point where it just doesn't really make sense. And, that's fine. But it's like, where are these people coming from? Why is there so much diversity? And I think that's what's interesting when you create diversity in your narratives and your character building, is when you're actually looking at the backgrounds of all these characters. If you're going to put a black guy in your show, or you're going to put an Asian guy in your show, or you're going to put a Mexican guy in your show, or a girl as well, why are they there? Why are you choosing this person, this representation? Where do they come from? What's their cultural background? What's their family life growing up? These are all things that are related to characters, and racism and culture, and I shouldn't say racism, just race in general, is an aspect that, you should reflect in your characters. If this is a black man that you're representing, did he experience racism in any kind of way? Did he experience any kind of oppression? Is he from a different kind of culture? What kind of country is he from? If he's from a different country, or was he born in Europe or in the North and had to deal with being a black person in medieval Europe, and what was that like? And these are elements of character building that should be implemented if you're going to be doing diversity. What I find offensive is when they just create diversity for the sake of diversity, because that's what we're supposed to do. That's the politically correct thing to do, is just to have a diverse cast. But, in terms of character and culture that they represent, they don't have any. They're just like these whitewashed characters, but because they're racially diverse, somehow that excuses the fact that these are actually just really bland characters that are being propagated for this politically correct narrative. Now, I use The Witcher because I just watched the first 2 episodes. I don't know how those characters that come from these different backgrounds are played out in the future, but it just seemed like, when I was watching it, and especially how the characters were utilized and how they spoke, most importantly, it was just like, okay, this is a whitewashed film where they decided, oh, we need a diverse cast, so let's just, it was like split down the middle. Let's just get all these different characters to represent, certain races, and then you'll get it over with, basically. It seemed very lazy and, not addressing the actual issue of diversity. Because I'm reading a book now, I'm reading Moby Dick, and it's a very diverse cast of characters in the show, and it's diverse in the sense that all of these characters have very radically different cultural backgrounds and very radically different, personalities that are, put to force because of their backgrounds, because of their ethnicities or their heritage, what have you. And that to me is like very important in character building. And I do this myself with writing. If I'm writing a character who's of a specific ethnic background or a cultural background, I make sure to implement that into that character, and not just, put them in there for the sake of putting them in there because I want to have a diverse cast of characters. It's not really about that. It's about, making sure that there's a representation of diversity, right? You're not just following this formula of very bland and boring characters. And that's where diversity actually helps writers. If they have boring characters, you can just pick characters that come from different cultures, and once you do the research on those cultures, you end up learning a lot yourself as a writer in general without the actual writing process. You're just learning so much. So I want to talk about that because it's just not productive if you're just going to do diversity for the sake of doing diversity because you want to be politically correct, you want to fit in. It's very much in line with that Black Square, Blackout Tuesday, just people wanting to fit in because they feel like they have nothing else to do. So I'll just put a black square and that'll excuse me from, being called out if I'm racist or problematic or don't give a shit about race or whatever, which to me is a little bit, it's not worse, but it's kind of like you're like trying to hide from something, or you're not really putting in the effort. If you want to like commit and say like, oh yeah, I'm anti-racist, I'm against racism and all this stuff, then actually do something about it. Otherwise, just be non-racist and let everyone else get on with their lives, because you're just lying at that point. You're being disingenuous. And this is very much a big thing with Hollywood and TV, is this forced diversification of characters. And what's the point? Why are you making it diverse if you're not going to incorporate the diversity of these people and their cultures? I guess it's different in a fantasy based location, like if you're in Star Trek or Star Wars. There's no connotation to black culture, for instance. There's no hip hop in the Star Wars universe. There's no Tupac or Biggie, or there's no Indian cultural heritage. There's no Vedic scriptures in Star Wars. There's no Taoism. There's no Buddhism. There's no anything like that. It's a completely different world. So if you're gonna implement, race and culture and diversity, then you have the power to basically just make up shit if you want. You can make up different cultures. You can make up different races. You can do anything you want, really, in that context, which again, a lot of people don't do. They just do this whitewash, bland character building of characters that are basically, white in the sense that, any typical American suburbanite could relate to, but there's no influence from other cultures from around the world that they can implement or create new cultures that have different customs and different mannerisms that you can put into. And that's an aspect that I think is important to look into. But if I'm going to go back to the race aspect, because I wanted to illustrate the fact that people are posting opinions, especially from black people, about this whole thing, and they sort of present it as this objective truth that we need to follow. This is the right opinion. And, part of being, a person who, let's say, just cares and wants to do the right thing, this comes from listening to other people, listening to every kind of information that you can, listening to a lot of different opinions, and just moving forward in the direction that you believe from your core to be right after listening to these different perspectives, and sort of contemplating in yourself, and sort of going into meditation and sort of thinking about what's the proper course for you in this specific area in the world, the specific time frame we're living in. What's the best thing for you and everyone as a collective? What should we do right now? And this comes from taking the time to actually learn and experience and listen to other people, which a lot of people aren't doing, even though they're saying that they are. They're kind of not. They're just kind of yelling at people to listen, but they're not listening themselves almost. I see that a lot. I see a lot of people getting really pissed off telling other white people to listen, and they're just perpetuating their own bullshit, and they're not even listening, And I think that's a huge problem. But overall, I'm not the one who's going to be the authority to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. I just wanted to, comment on something that I thought was important, which was specifically the diversity aspect of narrative building, which I'm seeing this trend a lot lately in the last 5 or 10 years, although it's happened in the 90s too. But in the 90s, when they did diversity, they did actually address, racism and cultural differences. They did it a lot. If you look at a show like The Office, it's a normie show, I guess you could call it that, but it's a really good show. They dealt with the issues of race and culture and discrimination very well, I find, and it's still lighthearted enough to fit within the confines of a comedy. So that's a very good example of diversity that's utilized. And then they have shows like The Witcher, where it's just utilizing diversity for the sake of it, which I think is a negative aspect of diversity, because you're kind of eliminating culture that is tied to race. Race and culture are very much intertwined because of, geographics, first of all, and also racism, particularly in America, has forced people to divide themselves into their own cultural, pools, if you want to call it that. But yeah, it's a complicated discussion to get into, for sure. And I think this is where people, if you want to make a difference, do what you want to do that you feel is right. And if people don't go to protests, whatever, going to a protest is dangerous. People are getting shot at, there's tear gas. It's a dangerous thing to do. And getting mad at people for not going is kind of, it's kind of just disrespectful towards people's safety. These are important things to get involved with, and if people go to protests, good for them. But if people don't want to go because of safety, or they're afraid, or they feel like they don't belong, then that's fine. This isn't a time to where we need to find people to hate. The people that are the enemy, if you want to call it that, the people that are enacting the rules of oppression are pretty obvious of who those people are. And those are the people that we should focus on if we want to defend ourselves from those people. And this isn't a time to ignore that and start looking for people who are on the fence or whatever and trying to villainize them. I think that's very toxic. I think it's very backwards in thinking, and it's going to cause more problems than solutions. And I'll leave it from, I watched American History X yesterday, and it's a show that sort of not a show, it's a movie, it's a film that illustrates how, with all this hatred that you can consume yourself with towards other people, is it really worth it in the end? Even if it is justified for what happened to you, is the hatred that you're filling yourself with going to help you or anyone at all in the end? And the answer is no, it's not. It's just going to consume you and just build up that hatred even more and more, and it just never goes away. It just stays there. And this is a time to where we need to ask ourselves, are we being consumed by hatred when we should be taking a step back and finding what the right path is without this attachment of anger or hatred behind it? It's one thing to react to a situation that's happening and take it to the streets and make your voice known. It's another thing to let that anger and let that hatred consume you to the point where you can't even make progress anymore. We can't even do anything because we're just consumed by this hatred. And this isn't directed at a specific group of people. This is very general, because there's hatred in every sort of demographic right now for different reasons, for different people. And this is a time where we need to be careful to not become consumed by that, because then we're not really different from the enemy, so to speak, if that resonates. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Peace.